Hey guys, today we are going to be making yeast rolls. Now this is my favorite yeast roll recipe. I found it on, I think, Pinterest. I will put the link to it down below. It's so good. She says that it only takes her an hour to make this recipe from start to finish. I have not yet perfected that hour, although I don't really time myself, so it is not very long. But I also do normally double this recipe for my family. So this particular time that you guys are watching, I did a single batch because soccer practice was tonight and I did not have enough time. I knew I wasn't going to have enough time to make a double batch. So I just did a single batch, but normally I do double it. So that could be where it is taking a little bit longer to complete. But this recipe is delicious. I have been told that it tastes very similar to Golden Corral rolls. Now, if you don't live in the South, you may not know what Golden Corral is, but here I'm taking the temperature of the water before I add my yeast. It was good, so I went ahead and added my yeast. I am activating my yeast. In this particular case, I am using dry active yeast, which needs a rise or a activation period. So I'm doing that. And while the yeast is rising, I am going to go ahead and melt my butter because I did take it out of the refrigerator. So I'm going to melt that, and I didn't melt it quite enough, so I end up putting it back in the refrigerator, not in the refrigerator, in the microwave, opposite of the refrigerator. And this is my yeast all activated, so it's all bubbly and nice. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding my other ingredients to my yeast, honey, and water. This recipe really is very easy and is so delicious. It is a great addition to most any meal. I forget what I added it to. I forget what I served these with, but I really enjoy adding them to a soup or a stew type meal, or they're really good with really any meal for breakfast. They're just a very versatile dinner roll. And you can also spruce them up. So sometimes I have put cinnamon honey on the top. I have sprinkled them with different seasonings. You can really play around with them and they are still absolutely delicious. So here I am oiling my bowl. This is what they are going to rise in for the first rise. So as soon as it comes out of the bowl, I'm checking to see how much more flour I should add. I added just a little bit more, and the way that I tell, and she actually says this in this particular recipe, is to touch the dough, and if it's too sticky, obviously add a little bit more, but you want it just like that. I'm pretty sure I took it out. Yep, I took it out right after that. So you want it to stick to your finger, but you don't want it to be like a batter. So you want it to stick just a little bit, but not leave a whole bunch of residue or a whole bunch of dough on your finger. So now you're going to flour your surface. This part, making sure that you just add enough flour to cover the surface, but not so much that it's going to incorporate too much within your dough, because whatever flour you put on this surface and whatever flour the dough touches, it will incorporate. So you don't want to add too much flour to the dough, and it'll just make it much more dense, and it'll change the flavor and the texture of your dough. So here, I'm going to rub some oil on the top so that it doesn't get a funny crust on top of it. I'm going to put it in my bowl that has been oiled, and I'm going to put it on top of my stovetop after I cover it with some saran wrap. Now you can also use a warm, moist towel to put over it as well. This is really just to keep the heat in and to make it so that the top of your dough doesn't dry out. So here I'm just going to go ahead and clean up and get this surface prepped for the next stage of the process. I always find this process very satisfying to watch in other people's videos, so I add it for you guys. So now I believe it's a little bit later. So it's had its rise period, which she calls for 20 minutes of a rise, and that is typically just fine. And so it's been sitting on the nice warm stove top on a little cork board, like pot holder thing. So it's been in a nice warm environment, but not hot environment. and now I'm going to knead it. Now, I'm still playing around with ways to do this in the best way. Today, I kneaded it, and then you're going to see me cutting off the little roll size balls. You want to make sure that the balls are about the same size. Now, I never really measure them. You can get a food scale out and actually measure the grams or the ounces or whatever of the ball, like the weight of each ball, to make sure that they're exactly the same size. I do not do that, and they always turn out absolutely delicious. But I am just eyeballing it here. I'm just cutting them just to roughly the same size, and I call it a day. So here I'm just adding some to some and taking some away from others, just making sure that they are all roughly the same size. And then I'm going to get my pan out. I'm going to oil my pan, and then I'm going to set it over to the side, and I'm going to start kneading my little dough balls. Now, this is the part of this whole process that takes the longest for me. I do believe that you can just kind of roll them into a ball, although I like for my rolls to have a nice smooth top and look like nice, plump, delicious rolls. So that's why I take the time to really knead them into these nice little loaves. This is almost exactly what I do for a full-size loaf of bread. I just do it in miniature size. So I'm just kneading it into the circle, or kneading it into a ball. And so I'm gonna hyper speed it for you here because this is the longest part of the process for me, especially when I do a double recipe. It takes twice the time. But what I do is I flatten it out first and get all the air bubbles out. Most of the air bubbles. Don't, wreck yourself trying to get all the air bubbles out. And then I just start folding it into the center over and over and over again until I get the shape and the consistency that I want, or the texture that I want on the outside of the ball. So if you look over here in my pan, you can see that they have nice, smooth, and rounded edges, and that is what I want. I have not tried to be a rebel and just roll it kind of like Play-Doh in my hand. Maybe I'll do that one day and let you guys know how it goes. So I'm just doing it over and over again. Careful not to add too much flour to my counter surface, but they were sticking a little bit, so I just would bring a little bit more flour in from the edges or on my fingertips. And then I'm going to clean it up because I'm going to bring it over here. And now I'm topping it with melted butter. Now you can also do this with just oil. I do have some dairy sensitivities in my family. And so there have been times when I have done this step with just oil, and it tastes just as good. It does not have to be butter. You can also do it with the non-dairy butter or margarine. It all tastes delicious. But today I am doing it with real dairy butter. And this is the part where you can really play around and have fun with it. Now, she calls for a coarse salt on the top, which is what I did today. Now I'm putting it back on top of my stovetop for another 20-minute rise before it goes in the oven, covered with saran wrap and on that little cork pot holder. Someone else told me what that was called in the comments of one of my other videos, and I forget what it was already. So this is 20 minutes later. It's about ready to go into the oven. Now back to what you can put on the top of this. So instead of coarse salt, you could probably put herbs or really anything. Checking on it, it's almost done, but not quite. So it's starting to get that nice golden on the top, but it's not quite, all of them aren't quite golden enough. And then I checked it a couple minutes later and they were all perfect. Now we're going to do it again. We're going to do the melted butter, and it is so satisfying. The sound this makes, it boils the butter a little bit and sizzles the butter. It's so satisfying and delicious, and it just makes it look beautiful and also taste beautiful. And here we go, finished product. They were so good. I cannot tell, they were just so good. So here they are. Normally I have 2 pans of them because normally I do double the recipe, but today I did not. And this is what they look like on the inside.